I open the floor for comments and questions to this. No, wait for the mic and.
I have a comment for Tommaso. In your net neutrality picture, you've actually misstated that substantially. Let me do Netflix in my own home. So Netflix has a signal in Virginia. It pays a company called Level 3 to get that signal into the internet. Level 3 gets it all the way to Los Angeles, where it's then handed off to Time Warner, who gets it to my home about 7 or 8 miles away. So Netflix already pays for internet service, and it pays Level 3. Time Warner would like to, and I don't know literally Time Warner, usually it's Verizon or AT&T, but Time Warner would like to charge Netflix for that last mile. Now, there's already a peering arrangement between Level 3 and Time Warner. So that is to say, in some sense, Netflix has already paid for access to my house. This is not one platform that's connecting me to Netflix at all. And the net neutrality issue is whether Time Warner can both charge Netflix and charge Level 3 for the transit of those signals.
Thanks. Should we collect the questions?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I have a related point to that, which I think, and that's just my perception of what's going on with net neutrality in the US and also in some European countries, which is that it's not just the question of the structure and levels of fees charged by the ISP as a platform, but it's also related to tied products on the retail side, and the fact that cable operators, and that's also true in Europe actually, are particularly vocal in trying to get upstream content providers to pay them. Is potentially a strategy to effectively foreclose competition on the audiovisual services market, for instance. And what we're seeing and that's kind of independent of the competition on the ISP market. It's more about whether ISPs also provide TV services and whether these TV services are relatively less competitive and more profitable for them, I think. And so if we look at countries like the UK, where BT is now in the TV market, but it's not a big provider of TV, its approach to effectively interconnection with content providers has been much more open than perhaps Liberty Global's has been.
Thanks. Okay. Can you also explain what Level 3?
Yeah, so remember, there is a launch very, very soon, so, and I don't want our productivity to increase that massively today. So the point I'm making is that we are still restricting some sort of contractual arrangement, say, between the Netflix and the Comcast, and we have to exclude for a moment the vertical issues. So Comcast might have a foreclosure intent because they offer their own content. Okay, so but let's keep it separate. So imagine they're not integrated with content, and so now the market solutions cannot count on alternative deals where, for instance, there is guaranteed quality of service that the platform provider, the ISP, can offer to matching the customer and the CP, the content provider. So, and now it's almost the only solution for Netflix to have operators such as Akamai and the content delivery network. So these are investments that offload lots of content from the ISP's network because things are in a sense stored more locally. So it's an open question whether these investments are efficient or inefficient. So my answer would be, well, if you have a static picture where the only thing that changes is that Netflix compensate Comcast and that's it, then there is no efficiency arguments because it's just a shift of or different rents. If instead, by doing this, say, then Netflix has to change the price to the end users, maybe they increase. So this would be a negative effect. So Netflix would have to pass through these extra costs onto the customer, and at the same time, the customer actually may get a better deal from a Comcast if there is some competition. Probably not in the US, but imagine again hypothetically, maybe it's completely neutral. Actually, you wrote a paper that says it depends on which links are cut. If you're already cutting many links and you remove an extra price, there will be real efficiency effects, and we have to look at that. If instead companies have many instruments and you play, so the effects will be neutral themselves because you expect some rebalancing. So it's an open question. So I was pushing, and so it seems to me that the system now is very conservative. You in the US and everyone else are not experimenting enough even to know empirically where we would be going if we allow this new contractual. And I'm genuinely interested to see what would happen. So. In this sense, it's a political economy. No one wants to move first, right? No one wants to experiment a new market deal, allowing, because imagine if it goes wrong, then your customer, your citizens, your local politicians will be banging on you. So, but then the system is inherently frozen at the moment, which is perhaps not a good thing because the system has, maybe it was good in the past and it's not good now. So I would like to see more experimentation in that sense.
Just one thing also about Preston's point about paying and doing it through level 3. I think. All right. So what Preston was saying is that Netflix has an ISP that they pay, and then that ISP has a transit agreement or peering agreement. Okay. But level 3 then is just providing, essentially, is providing like backbone service. Okay. And so then they deliver it, say, to the local. Let's say do it as Time Warner in his example. Now, the one thing, though, I think is why we saw that, in fact, Cogent and Level 3 and stuff tried to get the transit and peering agreements brought in under net neutrality and didn't, my understanding is they didn't get it under, but I predict we will see this come up again as a net neutrality issue if they start trying to change the nature of the transit agreements and peering to take into account the nature of traffic in more details in ways that will actually start getting at the fact that Netflix is the underlying source of the traffic. So, for example, right, it's a very asymmetric stream when you're dealing with it. And so you're right, there is this other mechanism for charging. I think what that's going to mean is eventually the market will figure that out, and then we're going to see net neutrality come back again attacking that.
Right. Paolo, you want to?
I just wanted to ask to both Michael and Tommaso a practical question, because you both mentioned the problem of market definition when you have two-sided markets, and then you're proposing that or suggesting that maybe competition authority can go at the beginning for narrow markets and then take into account the other side of the market in their assessment. Unfortunately, this is not the way it goes. When you have defined the market most of the time, they tend to forget the other side of the market. But I have a more practical issue with market definition, because I've heard that you can apply the same kind of logic as for traditional market, but you have just to keep in mind the feedback effect of raising the price. But in my view, actually the hypothetical monopolist test or the SNP test is really not applicable in this case, because you don't have the competitive price to start with. If there are different business models, and what is the price of a newspaper? It can be zero or a positive price. So there is an issue of what's the price you start with applying the test that you want. So shouldn't we try to get rid of market definition, at least in these markets, and try to assess the competitive issues without the boundaries and the constraints of precise market definition?
You want to go? I mean, one thing, you're raising issues, I think, that come up whether you're talking about two-sided markets or not a lot with market definition. Because one issue, for example, that's why the merger guidelines are about mergers and not market power and market definition in general. That with mergers, at least you often can take the pre-merger prices as the baseline for what's competitive. That may not be, but at least it's a useful starting point. You ask the question, is the merger going to make things worse? Now, when you're talking about unilateral effects cases, obviously it's a lot harder, and that's true in any market. But I think, end up doing, though, you have to do is say, well, and sometimes you have to do it as an assumption, say, well, let's suppose that the prices we see are no lower than the competitive price, and then do the thought experiment. What happens if you start raising the two-sided price, which you can either think of as trying to do it optimally on the two sides, and maybe one goes up and one goes down, but you look at the net difference, or what ended up, speak from experience, we did in the American Express case, is actually quite fortunate from being on the plaintiff side, is that American Express realized they had unexploited market power, and so what they did is they actually raised the price on one side of the market, they raised the price to merchants. It was disputed whether or not they lowered the price on the other side, but ultimately the court agreed that they didn't. And so we actually saw a case, then we said, all right, a reasonable hypothesis is the original prices were not below the competitive level. They profitably raised the prices from where they were, and that was informative both for market power for them, but also then folding back into the thought experiment, well, what if all credit card networks raised their prices? So I think in practice, there are ways to do it. It's always hard, and that's why I say, we do have to, I think, as Tommaso pointed out, you have to do it as a matter of legal procedure typically, but at the same time, I think a lot of courts are realizing more. We really should be worrying about the analysis and not those precise line drawing.
Well, mergers is a different story, of course, because mergers, what you're interested is in the incremental effect from the merger. So you start from the existing price and then you see what happens after. In all other type of cases, in abuse cases, if it's a monopoly price, then you may end up with very wide market definition to the SNP test. So you have to you are always in a process of defining the relevant market outside of mergers with difficulties. And I'm not sure that two-sided market create more difficulty than one-sided monopoly markets, for example, or so at the end, you still have to find the place where companies compete and who is affected by the practice. Tommaso?
Just a couple of random thoughts, so I've never done a competition policy case in a two-sided market, so I don't know. I've done some regulation cases and these are different. But I would try to say, well, it's sort of craftsmanship. So depending on the case, you mentioned newspapers, I would say, well, now the paper is for free. Obviously, I cannot increase the price by 10% of zero because it's still zero, but let's try to be practical and increase it by a bit. So let's go from 0 to 50 cents or something like this. And then what happens? And then would you lose customers? Probably yes. So then maybe you find some substitutability patterns in terms of audiences. And then they do the same also on the other side. And you said, well, let's start from maybe the current advertising rates or what I think is roughly a competitive advertising rate, and what happens if I raise the advertising rate? Is that going to be profitable? And then you try to put together and try to inform yourself on who are the relevant customers in this kind of platforms. But then I would say probably so I'm very sympathetic. I would say let's get rid of a SNP test. Easy for me to say as an economist which is not involved in antitrust cases. I don't know if this would fly in a court. And even more generally, I would challenge even more. I mean, back to the fundamental question: what is the objective of our policy intervention? So I do believe that competition authorities and regulators have different welfare standards. Actually, regulators look at efficiency thing. Competition authorities don't. And let's ask ourselves again: do we want competition authorities to look at efficiency arguments more directly? And then, if the answer is yes, it doesn't matter where you start from. You don't even define markets, etc., etc. But if the answer is different, then we have to stick to what is the current legal framework. But I would try to go even further. Let's rediscuss what is the objective of intervention of antitrust in general.
Thank you. Any other comment, observation? Okay, so thank you very much to all. And